Dad, how many kinds of boobs are there? The father, surprised, answers, well, son, a woman goes through 3 phases. In her 20s, a woman's breasts are like melons, round and firm. In her 30s and 40s, they are like pears, still nice, hanging a bit. After 50, they are like onions. Onions? The son asks. Yes. You see them and they make you cry. This infuriated his wife and daughter. The daughter asks, Mom, how many different kinds of willies are there? The mother smiles and says, well, dear, a man goes through 3 phases also. In his 20s, his willie is like an oak tree, mighty and hard. In his 30s and 40s, it's like a birch, flexible but reliable. After his 50s, it's like a Christmas tree. A Christmas tree? The daughter asks. Yes, dead from the root up, and the balls are just for decoration.
The Great Barrier Reef, huh?
And one young were pushing their carts around a grocery store when they collided. The old guy says to the young guy, sorry about that. I was looking for my wife. I guess I wasn't paying attention where I was going. Well, the young guy says, that's okay. I'm actually looking for my wife, too. Can't find her. I'm getting a little desperate. The old guy says, well, maybe we can help each other. What does your wife look like? The young guy says, well, she's 24 years old. She's pretty tall with blonde hair and blue eyes. She's got long legs, and she's wearing tight white shorts, a red halter top, and no bra. What does your wife look like? The old guy says, doesn't matter. Let's look for yours.
2 priests are off to the showers late one night. They undress and step into the showers before they realize there is no soap. Father John says he has soap in his room and goes to get it, not bothering to dress. He grabs 2 bars of soap, 1 in each hand, and heads back to the showers. He is halfway down the hall when he sees 3 nuns heading his way. Having no place to hide, he stands against the wall and freezes like he's a statue. The nuns stop and comment on how lifelike he looks. The first nun suddenly reaches out and pulls on his manhood. Startled, he drops a bar of soap. Oh, look, says the first nun. It's a soap dispenser. To test her theory, the second nun also pulls on his manhood. Sure enough, he drops the second bar of soap. Now, the third nun decides to have a go. She pulls once, then twice, and 3 times, but nothing happens. So she gives several more tugs, then yells, Holy Mary, Mother of God, hand lotion too! A farmer was sitting on his porch one day when a young man drives up and comes to the steps. Sir, I was driving by and noticed you had a lot of milkweed in your pasture. Would you mind if I went out and got some milk? The farmer replies, Son, you don't get milk from milkweed. Oh, yes, says the young man. I have a degree in agricultural science from Texas A&M. I know all about it. Well, help yourself then, the farmer replies. Amazingly, he then sees the young man coming back with 2 buckets full of milk. The next day, the farmer's sitting on the porch when the same young man drives up again. Sir, yesterday when I was getting milk, I noticed you had honeysuckle by the fence. Would you mind if I go out and get some honey? The farmer replies, Son, you can't get honey from honeysuckle. Everybody knows that. His degree again. The now agitated farmer fires back. Oh, just go ahead, son. Do what you want. A short time later, the young man arrives with 2 full pails of honey. Thanks again, sir, as he drives away. The next day, the young man pulls up to the farmer's house. Sir, when I was gathering honey, I noticed by the pond there was some pussy willow growing. The farmer pauses and then replies, Hang on a moment there, son. Let me get my boots. I'm going along with you. A man and his wife went to a livestock auction and looked at a farmer's selection of breeding bulls. The first pen had a sign that read, This bull mated 50 times last year. The man's wife playfully nudged him and said, Wow, that's almost once per week. They walked to the second pen, which had a sign that read, This bull mated 150 times last year. The man's wife jabbed him a bit harder and said with a smirk, Goodness, that's more than twice a week. You could learn a lot from him. They walked to the third pen, which had a sign that read, This bull mated 365 times last year. The man's wife aggressively elbowed him in the ribs and exclaimed, "That's once a day. You could really learn something from this one." Annoyed, the man turned to his wife and said, "Go over and ask the farmer if every time was with the same old cow." An 86-year-old man went to his doctor for his quarterly checkup. The doctor asked him how he was feeling, and the 86-year-old said, "Things are great, and I've never felt better. I now have a 20-year-old bride who is pregnant with my child. So what do you think about that, Doc?" The doctor considered his question for a minute and then began to tell a story. "I have an older friend, much like you, who is an avid hunter and never misses a season. One day, he was setting off to go hunting. In a bit of a hurry, he accidentally picked up his walking cane instead of his gun. As he neared a lake, he came across a very large male beaver sitting at the water's edge. He realized he'd left his gun at home, and so he couldn't shoot the magnificent creature. Out of habit, he raised his cane, aimed it at the animal as if it were his favorite hunting rifle, and went bang, bang. Miraculously, 2 shots rang out and the beaver fell over dead. Now, what do you think of that?" asked the doctor. The 86-year-old said, "Logic would strongly suggest that somebody else pumped a couple of rounds into that beaver." The doctor replied, "My point exactly." An 84-year-old man is sitting on a park bench, sobbing, when a young man walks by and asks him what's wrong. Through his tears, the old man answers, "I'm in love with a 22-year-old woman." "Well, what's wrong with that?" asks the young man. Between his sobs and sniffles, he answers, "You don't understand. Every morning before she goes to work, we make love. At lunchtime, she comes home and we make love again. And then she makes my favorite meal. In the afternoon, when she gets a break, she rushes home and gives me the best time an old man could want. And then it's supper time, and all night long, we make love." He breaks down, no longer able to speak. The young man puts his arm around him. "I don't understand. It sounds like you have the perfect relationship. Why are you sitting here on this park bench crying?" The senile old man answers, again through his tears, "I can't remember where I live."
A husband and wife are sitting in a diner having breakfast. The husband leans over and asks his wife, "Do you remember the first time we had sex together over 50 years ago? We went behind the village tavern where you leaned against the back fence and I made love to you." "Yes," she says, "I remember it well." "Okay," he says, "how about taking a stroll around there again and we can do it for old time's sake?" "Oh, Jim, you old devil, that sounds like a crazy but good idea." A police officer sitting in the next booth heard their conversation and, having a chuckle to himself, he thinks to himself, "I've got to see these 2 old-timers having sex against a fence. I'll just keep an eye on them so there's no trouble." So he follows them. The elderly couple walks along, leaning on each other for support, aided by walking sticks. Finally, they get to the back of the tavern and make their way to the fence. The old lady lifts her skirt and the old man drops his trousers. As she leans against the fence, the old man moves in. Then suddenly they erupt into the most furious sex that the policeman has ever seen. This goes on for about 10 minutes, while both are making loud noises and moaning and screaming. Finally, they both collapse, panting on the ground. The policeman is amazed. He thinks he has learned something about life and old age that he didn't know. After about half an hour of lying on the ground recovering, the old couple struggle to their feet and put their clothes back on. The policeman is still watching and thinks to himself,
BetMGM Casino has the most exciting...
"This is truly amazing. I've got to ask them what their secret is." So, as the couple passes, he says to them, "Excuse me, but that was something else. You must have had a fantastic sex life together. Is there some sort of secret to this?" Shaking, the old man is barely able to reply, 50 years ago, that wasn't an electric fence.
The couple comes down to breakfast on their 50th anniversary. As the husband sits, the wife serves the same breakfast she did 50 years ago on their wedding morning. He sits down, starts eating, picks up the paper and starts reading. Somewhat disappointed, she says, "Honey, do you remember that it was 50 years ago that we had our first married breakfast together?" The husband lowers his paper so he can see her and says, "Oh yeah, how about that? Happy anniversary." Again, somewhat disappointed, she then asks, "Do you remember anything special about that breakfast?" He lowers the paper again and looks over puzzled. To avoid embarrassing him again, she says, "Don't you remember that we sat at the table stark naked while we ate breakfast?" The husband responds, "Of course I remember. Those were the days. But at our age, I didn't want to embarrass you by bringing it up." He raises the paper to cover his face. Some moments go by, and she again speaks to him. "Honey?" She waits till he lowers the paper so they can see each other. At this point, he's getting annoyed with the constant interruptions, but he tries not to show it. When he's looking at her, she says, "What do you say? Just for nostalgia and to celebrate 50 years of marriage, we repeat that day, just like we did 50 years ago?" Reluctantly, he agrees, knowing he'll never hear the end of it. They go into separate rooms and disrobe and finally return to sit at the table. His paper again lifted up to cover his face. After a short time, he hears, "Honey?" The husband lowers his paper, and when their eyes meet, she says, "Oh, honey, I think I'm getting that warm feeling again." He puts the paper down, glances left to right across the table, and says, "I'm not surprised, love. You have one boob hanging in your coffee, and the other one is in your oatmeal."
Me and my wife have been married 35 years, and I never let her look in the safe. But last week when I went to market, she looked in the safe, and when I got back, Jethro, she said, "I've looked in the safe." I said, "I told you not to look in there." She says, "There's 40,000 in there in cash and 3 eggs. She said, "What's the eggs doing?" I said, "Well, I'll be honest." I said, "Every time I've shagged somebody else's wife, I put an egg in the safe." She said, "Well, that's not bad in 35 years, is it?" I said, "No, but when I get a dozen, I sell them, and that's where the money comes." 4 nuns come to confession in Cornwall, 4 nuns, and the first one said, she said, I've touched a man on his private parts." They said, "Well, that could happen to anybody in the busy street." "I know," but she said, I did it on purpose." But he said, "On the way out, wash your hand in that holy water, you filthy bastard." That's the way they talk. So the second one came in, she said, I've touched a man's private parts with both hands." He said, "Well, it could have been an accident." She said, "No accident. I've done it purposely." He said, "Well, wash both your hands in the holy water when you go out." Well, the fourth one said to the third one, "Can I go in front of you?" She said, "Why?" She said, "Well, I don't have to gargle that water after you've sat in it." The teacher, I got to learn the difference between theory and reality. I said, "Well, going after your mother, if she sleep with a plumber for £1,000,000. He come back and said, "Mother said, yes, she would sleep with a plumber for £1,000,000. I said, "Well, there you go. Now go and ask your sister if she sleep with a plumber for £1,000,000. He come back and she said she would as well. I said, "There you go. That's the difference between theory and reality. In theory, we're sitting on £2,000,000. In reality, we're living with a pair of slappers." I went in and seen the woman doctor. She said, "Jethro," she said, "you've got to stop masturbating." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I'm trying to examine you." For 7 years, I've suffered with headache. I woke up with headache, and I've gone to bed with headache, and after 7 years, you can't take any more. And I went and seen the doctor last week. I said, "I can't stand these headaches anymore." He said, "Well, Jeffrey, we've tried every medication possible." He said, "The only thing we haven't tried is castration." Well, I didn't really want that because they've hung around for years, you know. I said, "Well, I can't stand the headaches." I said, "Cut them off." She cut them off. I said, "I'll take them home for the dog." Well, I walked in the street and the headache completely gone. And after 7 years with a headache, you can't believe how good I felt. I thought, I'm going to have a new suit. And I went in the tailor shop. I said, "I want a new suit. And I want the best suit in the shop." He said, "You'll be a 44 chest." I said, "How do you know?" He said, "That's my job. I'm a tailor. I can tell just by looking." Christ, I said, "You good?" He said, "You'll be a 36 waist and a 30 inside leg. You're not tall." Right, he bloody good. He said, you want a new pair of pants? You'll be a 34. I said, ha ha. You've overshot the runway, smartass. I said, I'm a 32. He said, no, you're 34. I said, I'm telling you, I'm a bloody 32. He said, you listen to me. If you wear a 32 pants, will pinch your balls that tight, will give you a headache. Last week, I went in a brothel. And when I got in, the sign said beef sandwiches £1, lettuce sandwiches £2, chips £2.70, chicken and chips £5, wank £10, blowjob £20, and sex £45. Well, the woman came out, she said, can I help you? I said, are you the lady that does the wanking? She said, yes, I am. I said, well, you wash your hands and make me a beef sandwich. Country's gone to bollocks, isn't it? You remember when we had an empire, and then it was led by an emperor. Then we had a kingdom, it was led by a king, and now we got a country.
Want to know how Cleopatra 50% of withdrawals are instant? No need.
I always remember when I went in the maternity hospital to pick her up, the doctor came out, he said, Jeffro, he said, you just become the proud father of 4 baby bouncing boys. I said, 4? Cried. I said, I'm not surprised. I said, I got a dick like a chimney. Well, he said, you want to get it swept, they're all black. Somebody stole the vicar's bike. And he said to me, Jeffro, some bastard have stolen my bike. I said, well, look, Reverend, when you're in church on Sunday morning, what you want to do is read out the 10 Commandments, and when you come to thou shalt not steal, have a look around. See if anybody's looking guilty. He said, that's a good idea. I'll do that. When I seen him come out of church, I said, did you find who stole your bike? He said, Jeffro, I got in the middle of the 10 Commandments. And he said, when I got to thou shalt not commit adultery, I remembered where I left my bike. I woke up yesterday morning and there's a gorilla in the tree in my garden, a bloody gorilla. So I rung Payton Zoo. I said, there's a bloody gorilla in my garden. They said, we'll send out the gorilla catcher. Well, when he come, he had a dog, a pair of handcuffs, and a shotgun. I said, what do you do? Well, he said, what I do is I climb the tree, and I shake the tree until the gorilla fall out, and then this dog is trained to bite his knackers. And he bites his knackers, and he squeezes his knackers that tight, and eventually, with the pain, the gorilla will go like that. When he does, you put the handcuffs on. I said, you're going to shake the bugger out of the tree, and that bloody thing with them great teeth is going to bite his knackers? Shit. I said, what's the shotgun for? He said, if I fall out the tree, shoot the dog. Last Sunday morning, I was in church, and there was a very elderly couple in front of me. They really were very, very, very old. And in the middle of the sermon, this dear old lady, bless her heart, she was gorgeous. She whispered in her husband's ear, she said, I've just very, 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 very quietly broken wind. She said, what do you think I should do? And he said, put a new battery in your hearing aid. I got home last night and there was a man in the bed with my wife. And I got very, very jealous. I went down and got the shotgun. And I came in the bedroom and this man got out of the bed. And I aimed both barrels straight at his bollocks. Oh, please, Jeffro, he cried. Please. He said, give me a chance. I said, well, just swing them a little bit. And I dragged him out of the bed and down across the garden and in the shed at the bottom of the garden. I put his cock in the vice and screwed the vice up on his cock Then I got out the handsaw. Jethro, he said, you're not going to cut my cock off. No. I said, you are. I'm setting fire to the shed. I said, I think my wife is deaf. He said, well, how deaf is she? I said, I don't know. He said, well, I'll tell you what to do. When you get home, stand 20 feet away and say, what's for dinner, dear? And if she don't answer, go to 15 feet, then say, what's for dinner, dear? And keep moving 5 feet every time. And tell me how far you are away when she actually answered. I said, right, I'll do that. So I got home, I said, what's for dinner, dear? Nothing. So I got to 15 feet. I said, what's for dinner, dear? Nothing. I had 10 feet. What's for dinner, dear? Nothing. I got to 5 feet. I said, what's for dinner, dear? She said, I've told you 4 bloody times, chicken.
You got that faster than me. I didn't get that straight away.
It's because you're a man.